In truth, every human being, man or woman, carries fears. These are not the fears of beasts or of war, but the quieter fears, the existential fears, the ones that arise when we come face to face with the profound uncertainties of our existence. And though many of us carry these fears, the woman, particularly, seems to wear them with a tenderness that makes them all the more poignant. The fear of being misunderstood is one of the quietest yet most persistent anxieties we can experience in our relationships and interactions. It isn't a fear that shouts for attention, but rather it lingers in the background, subtly influencing how we communicate, how we act, and even how we see ourselves. At its core, this fear is tied to the deep-seated desire to be known, not just on the surface, but in our innermost thoughts, feelings, and intentions. We long to be seen for who we truly are, to have our words, our expressions, and our hearts understood by others. And yet, despite our best efforts, there often seems to be a gap between what we mean to convey and what others receive. When a woman feels misunderstood, it's not just a matter of simple miscommunication. It can feel like a profound disconnect, as though her essence is being misrepresented or overlooked. This fear often arises in moments of vulnerability when she is trying to share something deeply personal or important. Whether it's an idea, a dream, a feeling, or a need, she offers it with the hope that the other person will truly understand the depth of her intentions. Yet too often the response she receives feels disconnected or misaligned with her own internal experience. What she expresses may be filtered through the lens of the other person's own experiences, biases, or limitations. The words that were meant to convey clarity might instead become muddled or distorted, leading to frustration, hurt, or confusion. This fear is especially poignant when it comes to intimate relationships. When a woman feels misunderstood by someone she loves, it can feel as though her very identity is being questioned. It's not just a difference of opinion or perspective. It's a fear that the most important parts of her are being seen through a distorted lens. She may begin to doubt her ability to communicate or even question whether her thoughts and feelings are valid in the first place. This sense of isolation can be deeply painful, for at its root, it's a fear of not being fully known or accepted, of being reduced to something less than her true self. The fear of being misunderstood also highlights the limits of language itself. Language, after all, is an imperfect medium through which we try to communicate the complexities of our inner worlds. Words can only go so far in expressing the fullness of what we feel, think, or experience. Often the deeper parts of ourselves remain unspoken, hidden in the silence between words or in the nuances of our actions. No matter how carefully we choose our words, there's always the possibility that they won't fully capture the essence of what we mean, or that they will be misinterpreted in ways we never intended. But it's important to recognize that being misunderstood is not always the result of someone else's failure to listen or understand. Sometimes it's simply a result of the complexity of human communication itself. Our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are shaped by our unique histories, personalities, and perceptions, and these differences can create barriers to true understanding. In this sense, being misunderstood is not a personal flaw, but a universal human experience. Every person, at one point or another, has felt the frustration of knowing that their innermost self cannot be fully grasped by another. Despite this, the fear of being misunderstood need not be a paralyzing force. It's a reminder that communication is an ongoing process, a continual exchange of thoughts, feelings, and experiences that require patience, openness, and vulnerability. While it's natural to fear misunderstanding, it's also essential to embrace the idea that true understanding often requires time, effort, and a willingness to meet each other where we are, with all our complexities and contradictions. In the end, the fear of being misunderstood can become an invitation to communicate more deeply, to listen more attentively, and to cultivate empathy, not only for others but for ourselves as well. The fear of inadequacy is a deeply ingrained fear that many people, particularly women, grapple with throughout their lives. It manifests in a quiet but insistent voice that constantly questions whether one is enough in the world, enough for others, enough for themselves. This fear often arises from a perceived gap between one's aspirations and abilities, or between societal expectations and personal achievements. It's the nagging feeling that no matter how much one accomplishes, it will never be sufficient, that there is always something more to be done, something else to be proved. At its core, the fear of inadequacy is rooted in self-doubt. It emerges when a person feels that they do not measure up to the standards set by others, or even by their own internal barometer. These standards can be external, the expectations of parents, teachers, partners, or society as a whole. Society often holds women to specific, sometimes impossible, standards of beauty, success, and behavior. They are expected to be nurturing and selfless, while also achieving success in their careers, maintaining a perfect home, and being emotionally available. This dual pressure of fulfilling conflicting roles can create a sense of perpetual insufficiency, leaving women to wonder if they will ever meet these expectations, even when they are doing their best. The fear of inadequacy can also stem from a deeper, more internalized belief, the idea that one's inherent worth is conditional, based solely on external achievements or validation. This is especially true when a person has been raised in an environment where approval and love were given only when certain conditions were met, whether it was academic excellence, athletic prowess, or fulfilling traditional gender roles. The belief that self-worth is contingent upon success can create a constant state of anxiety, where failure, no matter how small, feels like a personal flaw rather than a natural part of growth. This fear breeds a cycle of overworked perfectionism and self-criticism, where even the smallest mistake is seen as proof of inadequacy. In the context of relationships, this fear can be particularly damaging. A woman may feel that in order to be loved or appreciated, she must be flawless, always giving, always understanding, always strong. The moment she shows vulnerability, makes a mistake, or asks for help, she may fear that she will no longer be seen as worthy of love. The fear of inadequacy often leads to people-pleasing behaviors, where one sacrifices their own needs to meet the demands of others. Yet this very tendency to give everything without receiving in return can lead to feelings of emptiness and frustration, reinforcing the belief that one is never enough. The most insidious part of the fear of inadequacy is that it often operates in the background, unnoticed until it begins to shape decisions and actions. It can cause a person to avoid taking risks, trying new things, or stepping outside of their comfort zone for fear of failing and proving their inadequacy. It can prevent one from seeking out opportunities for growth, or even acknowledging their own achievements. Even when successes are attained, they are often dismissed or downplayed, with the individual focusing on what still needs to be done, rather than celebrating what has been accomplished. However, the fear of inadequacy can also be a source of motivation, driving a person to strive for self-improvement. But this drive can become unhealthy if it leads to chronic self-criticism or burnout. The key is to recognize that true worth does not come from perfection or constant achievement, but from the acceptance of one's imperfections. No one is perfect, and everyone has moments of failure and doubt. These are not signs of inadequacy, they are part of being human. The fear of inadequacy can also be softened by the practice of self-compassion. Recognizing that worth is inherent and not conditional on meeting external standards can help to release the grip of this fear. It's important to understand that personal value comes from within, from how we treat ourselves, how we acknowledge our own growth, and how we show up authentically in the world. By embracing this truth, the fear of inadequacy begins to lose its power, and the individual can begin to recognize their inherent value, not in terms of what they do or achieve, but in who they are. The fear of impermanence and change is a fundamental human experience, one that touches the very core of our existence. It arises from the recognition that nothing in life is fixed, that all things, including our relationships, our circumstances, and even ourselves, are in a constant state of flux. At first glance, change may seem like a natural and inevitable part of life, but for many it brings a profound sense of discomfort, loss, and even dread. The fear lies not just in the inevitable changes themselves, but in the awareness that we cannot control them, and that everything we hold dear could slip away in an instant. This fear often manifests when we become too attached to things as they are. We find comfort in the familiar, the steady routines, the stable relationships, the identity we've built over time. But the world is constantly shifting, and even the most solid aspects of our lives are subject to the laws of change. A relationship we thought would last forever might unravel. A career we've worked tirelessly to build might shift or disappear, or the body that has always been strong and reliable might age or falter. All of this reminds us of the fragility of life, the fleeting nature of our existence. For many, the fear of impermanence is deeply tied to the fear of loss. When we grow attached to something, whether it's a person, a place, or a phase of life, we can become consumed by the idea of losing it. We fear the unknown that comes with change, the disorientation that follows when something we have relied on is no longer there. The idea that everything we cherish is temporary can feel like a deep wound, one that cuts through the illusion of stability we desperately cling to. In this sense, the fear of impermanence is also a fear of vulnerability, the vulnerability of loving something that could one day be taken away. Yet this fear is not merely about external change. It is also a fear of internal transformation. As we grow and evolve, we sometimes feel that the person we were is slipping away, and we may fear that the person we are becoming is somehow less authentic or less true to who we once were. We fear losing the essence of ourselves as time moves forward. This internal conflict is especially pronounced in moments of great change, such as major life transitions, when we question if we are still the same person we once were. The fear of impermanence in this case is a fear of losing our sense of identity, of no longer being able to recognize ourselves in the mirror of life. There is also a subtle fear that comes with realizing that change is beyond our control. No matter how much we try to hold on, no matter how much effort we put into maintaining the status quo, life continues to unfold in unpredictable ways. This realization can feel unsettling, as though we are at the mercy of forces much greater than ourselves. The desire to control the flow of life, to keep things from changing, can feel like an endless struggle against the tide. But in trying to resist change, we find ourselves at odds with the natural rhythm of life itself. The more we attempt to cling to the past, or to the way things are, the more we may find ourselves fighting against the inevitable currents of time. The fear of impermanence, however, is not without its gifts. It is through the awareness of impermanence that we are reminded to live fully in the present moment. When we recognize that everything is temporary, we are more likely to savor what we have, to cherish the fleeting moments that come our way, and to embrace the beauty that exists precisely because it is ephemeral. It is in the awareness of change that we may find the freedom to let go of attachments that no longer serve us, and to open ourselves to new possibilities. By accepting the truth of impermanence, we can begin to let go of the fear that holds us back. Change becomes less of an enemy, and more of a companion, a part of the ongoing dance of life that allows us to evolve, grow, and transform. Rather than fearing loss, we can begin to appreciate the richness that comes from experiencing life in all its ever-changing forms. The fear of impermanence, when embraced, becomes an invitation to live more authentically, to surrender to the flow of life, and to find peace in the knowledge that everything, no matter how beautiful or painful, is part of the ever-changing journey of existence. The fear of love and vulnerability is one of the deepest and most complex fears that many people experience. It is the paradox that while love is often seen as the most beautiful and desired aspect of human existence, it also brings with it the possibility of pain, loss, and heartbreak. To love is to open oneself to another, to share parts of oneself that are deeply personal, and in doing so, to expose oneself to the risk of being hurt. It is in this exposure that vulnerability arises, and it is this vulnerability that makes love both a source of immense joy and a potential source of immense pain. At the heart of this fear is the simple truth that love requires us to let go of control. To love someone is to make oneself vulnerable to the possibility of being hurt. We allow ourselves to care for another, to become emotionally entwined with them, and in doing so we place our hearts in their hands. Love, in its purest form, cannot be contained or manipulated. It exists in the space between two people, but it is not something that can be fully controlled, and this lack of control is deeply unsettling for many. We fear that in loving deeply we might be left exposed, raw, and broken when things inevitably change, as they always do. This fear of vulnerability is often compounded by past experiences of hurt or betrayal. Many people have been wounded by love at some point in their lives, whether through abandonment, rejection, or the dissolution of a cherished relationship. These experiences create a kind of emotional scar tissue that forms a protective barrier around the heart. The fear of experiencing the same hurt again leads to a reluctance to fully open oneself to love in the future. It is easier, in some ways, to remain guarded, to keep a safe distance from others, than to risk the chance of being hurt again. This fear may cause someone to hold back from truly expressing their feelings, to keep their emotions in check, and to avoid situations where they might become vulnerable. Yet in doing so, they also close themselves off from the very source of deep connection and intimacy that love offers. The fear of love also intersects with the fear of loss. Love is inherently impermanent. People change, relationships evolve, and sometimes even the most deeply cherished bonds come to an end. When we allow ourselves to love, we open ourselves to the possibility of losing that love, and this loss is a fear that can paralyze the heart. We fear that the person we love may not feel the same way, or that circumstances might tear us apart. This fear of abandonment can prevent us from fully experiencing love, as we may hold back, not wanting to become too attached or dependent on someone who might not be there in the future. It can also lead to a fear of intimacy, where we avoid getting too close or becoming too emotionally invested, as a way of protecting ourselves from the inevitable grief that might follow. Another layer of the fear of love is the fear of being seen. Love requires us to show ourselves to another, to be truly known, not just the versions of ourselves that we present to the world, but the raw, imperfect, and sometimes messy parts of us that we keep hidden. This exposure of our true selves can feel like an unbearable risk. We fear that if someone truly sees us all our flaws, insecurities, and vulnerabilities, they may not love us in return. We fear rejection, judgment, or even worse, indifference. In this sense, the fear of love is also the fear of not being enough, the fear that we are not worthy of the love we desire. But here lies the profound truth. It is in embracing this very vulnerability that love becomes its most powerful and transformative force. The beauty of love lies in its ability to connect us to others, to create a shared space where we can be seen for who we truly are. Love is not about perfection or invulnerability. It is about the willingness to show up as we are, to let down our defenses, and to trust that the other person will meet us with compassion and care. Vulnerability, far from being a weakness, is the gateway to deeper intimacy and connection. It is through vulnerability that we open ourselves to the fullness of love, to the possibility of not just joy, but also growth, healing, and understanding. The fear of love and vulnerability is a fear of living fully. When we close ourselves off from love, we close ourselves off from the richness of human experience. To love is to risk, yes, but it is also to experience the profound beauty that comes with that risk. True love is never perfect, and it is rarely without pain, but it is always a profound act of trust in the other person, and trust in oneself. It is this trust that allows us to move past the fear, to embrace the vulnerability, and to experience the depth of connection that love offers. Ultimately, it is through love that we find our greatest strength, for it is in allowing ourselves to be vulnerable that we discover the courage to truly live.